Recording in progress.
Good morning, honorable members and colleagues.
Good morning.
Mornings. Can you hear me?
Morning,
Yes.
morning.
Yes, yeah. Are we well this morning?
We're all well, just
Thank you.
tired.
Yes, also members, there's an improvement from chair, but unfortunately he said to me he won't join us today, but in the next meeting he will be with us. So we need to elect an acting chair. Can I get a name, please?
Chilega, I can't raise my hand. Can I nominate?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Can I nominate Honorable Gancho?
Honorable Ganjo, okay. Thank you, Honorable Madam.
Yes, Chief, thanks. Good morning, colleagues. I second the nomination of Honorable Gancho. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Tunu. Honorable Ganjo, do you accept the nomination?
Thank you, Chilega. Yes, I accept the nomination from the members. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any further nominations? Members? All right. Thank you, Honorable.
None.
Oh, thank you. Honorable Ganjo, congratulations. You are the acting chair for the meeting.
Thank you, Chilega, and thank you to honorable members for affording me this opportunity. Let me first apologize. I am trying to switch on my video. I am struggling. It's saying, please allow Zoom to access your camera from device settings. So I don't know, but I will keep on trying to switch it on. Greetings to all of you, honorable members and colleagues. And this is the third meeting without our honorable chairperson. We wish him speedy recovery. And I am happy to hear that he is at least recovering very well. He is getting stronger every day. We want him out. We want him to come back and chair the portfolio committee. Members, I know that last week, Tuesday, we had a meeting, and as the committee, we discussed important issues brought up by the public, and we also focused on funding for climate adaptation, which is a critical aspect. And the bill suggests that provinces and municipalities will handle this, but we need a clear funding plan to ensure effective implementation. And if you don't address this, inadequate resources and climate unpreparedness will persist. So the department, when it is responding, it needs to be clear in terms of its responsibility for this climate change response. And it should ensure proper funding alignment with agreements and local needs. Municipalities already face funding challenges for basic services. Metropolitan municipalities also struggling with the climate change strategies due to budget constraints. So we really need to get a clear indication from the department on how are they going to assist in this regard. And today, colleagues, we will focus on the responses that were written by members, on the questions that were written by the members, and we will also forge our way towards the drafting of the A list and on climate change bill. And I was informed that there were written questions that were sent by members, and I would request that the department respond to the questions that were sent on Friday and include the funding of the legislation on their responses. And it has been a standard practice, colleagues, to account for the financial implication or cost of each and every bill. So the department will have to really respond. For example, when we were dealing with the NEMLA bill, the department stated that the funds for implementation will come from SARS levies on waste stream. So as it had, they stated that there would be no new financial implications for for National Forest Amendment Bill and the National Field Forest Fire Amendment Bill, because forestry branch is already funded to carry out the functions proposed in the amendments. We are also expecting a similar approach to this bill, colleagues, so that there is clarity on who will be funding its implementation and how. Minister Chris made an undertaking to consider the inclusion of text into the bill that will be funding consent, which is at the care of the bill's implementation. So I hope that the Minister is also part of the meeting so that she can give us guidance in this regard. And my last remarks, colleagues, the department will go through the 50-page response document page by page, and will also afford the opportunity to the members to ensure that, in fact, this is an opportunity for us members to ensure that the legal teams receives clear instruction for the next steps. And members will also have to indicate whether they agree with the proposed phrasing of the report or whether they believe it could be improved further. So once adopted, it will serve as a directive to the legal teams to prepare on an A list of the bill, which will be presented for consideration and deliberations. The preparation of the A list will involve consultation with the state law advisor to ensure compliance with drafting the standards. With those few words, colleagues, let me welcome all of you in the meeting. Hileka, may I request that you flight the agenda so that we can move to point number 2. We are all welcomed, colleagues. We are now going to move to apologies. Is there any apologies, Hileka?
Yes, Chairperson, we have apologies from Mr. Modise, Honorable Tapa, Deputy Minister Soju, and DG Ms. Chabalala. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, is there anyone who wants to submit an apology? Honorable members?
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and greetings to colleagues. I'll be in the meeting, but I just want to raise that the fact that I'm not well, but I'll be in the meeting, but I'm not okay. So
Okay.
there might be a time when I need to see a doctor, but I'll just send a note to the chairperson. Thank you.
That is noted, and get well soon, Mama Mkhulu. Honorable Singh, I see your hand is up.
No, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I might have to be excused at 11:30 for another engagement, but I think 1.5 hours should be enough for this. But once you've done with the apologies, I just want to make 1 or 2 comments as well, once you're done. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Singh. I do not see any hand. Oh, okay.
Bata.
Honorable Bata, I see your hand is up as well, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to let the Chair and Chileka know that I have a crisis. The ceiling fell. So there's a lot of noise that is happening in the house. So if I don't hear you, please pardon me. They are busy fixing. I have a disaster in the house.
Noted, Honorable Mbata. Are there no further?
Chair, the Minister has got a hand up.
Honorable
Chair.
Chrissy, I see your hand. Thank you, Honorable Singh. Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and greetings to members of the committee. Chair, I will be with you until about 11:15, and then unfortunately I'll have to leave the meeting for another commitment. But I am here, and I know that some members, like Member Singh, may not have been here last time, so I would also afford that opportunity for response, as you correctly said, to the issues raised last time and other issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Can we then move for adoption of the agenda? Apologies, and also agenda? Can I get a hand or a mover for the adoption of the agenda? Thank you, Honorable Singh. A second?
I second.
Thank you, Honorable Mkhunu. Honorable Singh, you said you wanted to say something.
Yes, very
after
briefly.
we have
Thank you.
the agenda. Okay, then.
Thank you
After
very
that,
much.
I will. Okay.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Just to say that last week, about 10 days ago, as I had indicated in a previous meeting, that a group of young people from the Durban Girls College and a number of other schools, youth, had made some inputs. It came in a bit late, but I submitted it to Mr. Kininza for factoring into the submissions that we received. So I just wanted to indicate that. And then I think as we move on, I'm sure the Minister will respond to the questions of the actual role of the PCC vis-a-vis the Department of Environment, and then the financial aspects, which you indicated is extremely important. So those are the two things I just wanted to raise in the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Singh.
Chair, I have my hand up.
Oh, Honorable Winker.
Thank you so much, and good morning, colleagues, and good morning to the department and the Honourable Minister. So the sitting today that we're having, we had also requested that there be a more broad question session as well to be allowed in this meeting. And then we only had about, I would say, 4 days to go through the 600-page document. So my request would be that, because it didn't really allow much time to peruse thoroughly, if we don't get through all the questions today, the oral ones as well as the ones submitted on Friday, if we could also then extend this to the next portfolio committee next week, please. Thank you.
I am noting what you are raising, Honorable Winger, but we should also be cognizant of the fact that we need to finish and conclude this part of questions. So in whatever we're doing today, we must try by all means to cover all the aspects that are at play. I've noted that there will be questions, but let us afford the department an opportunity to respond to the written ones, and also to those who will be raised. Then we will see as we move with the meeting. But I'm noting what you are raising, Honorable Winkler. Honorable Bryant, I see your hand.
Thanks very much, Acting Chairperson, and good morning from a very wet and chilly Cape Town. Just to follow on from Honourable Winker's point, I do see in the agenda that you have allocated a section for discussion. So I'm assuming that's where we're going to have the questions and answers. So yes. Hopefully we can cover that during that section. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Bryant. Kilega, can you flight again the agenda? Minister, I am going to ask if you want to say something before we continue with the presentation.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Yes, I think that thank you for the opportunity, and let me just say that I'm here with the acting DG, Ms. Mamukhala Mosekeni, and I'm I'm also accompanied by Mr. Chloe Romaro, Mr. Jongi Kayawiti, and Ms. Linda Garlip, as well as other members from the climate team. And I think that they do have a presentation which they will flight shortly. But allow me to comment on the issues that we were discussing last time, because I think that these are very important issues, and we have given due consideration to these issues in the course of the last 4 days. And I would like to report on our considerations. First of all, I think that having read the submissions and having listened to the conversation that took place last week, Tuesday, it's very clear that there is a concern that subnational government should face a difficulty with regard to financing, and also not just financing, but I think overall support to build climate resilience. And we had a look at the bill, because what we had agreed last time is we want to put in an enabling provision. And we are going to put in an enabling provision that basically says that the minister must prescribe a mechanism for financing and or support. And we're going to put this into the section of the bill. Mr. Romaro will explain. We're going to put it into the section of the bill where we talk about the role of subnational government with regard to building climate resilience. Now, this enabling provision will enable the minister to do a number of things. First of all, it is a provision that would enable, through regulation, the establishment of a fund. And that fund could receive money from international sources. It could also receive money from the department. So that's the first thing that this, what we're calling a mechanism, would be able to do. But secondly, at the moment, we do an enormous amount of work with provinces and with municipalities to develop plans and programs to enhance climate resilience. And we would want that to be enshrined in law, so that it's not just a characteristic of this administration, but it is obviously something that could continue. You will remember last time I had indicated that we would look at a mechanism that would not require major changes to the bill, because if there are major changes, then it has to go back to cabinet, it has to go back to NEDLAC, and that could well delay the process for a couple of years. So this particular process would allow in due course for the development of regulations. And as you know, regulations also have to come to the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. And I think that would then ensure that we have the mechanism, but there is also oversight from the National Assembly and from the NCOP on the purpose of that particular provision. Secondly, going back to the role of the Presidential Climate Commission, and I think last week when we discussed this, Honorable Singh was not in the meeting. But let me say to you, Honorable Singh, that my own view is that the Climate Commission works quite well in its current form. It is independent enough that it is able to give robust advice to government. And I think we've seen that in the work that was done around the NDC that was submitted in 2021. I think we've also seen it in the process around the JET IP, that there is a robustness in the role of the Presidential Climate Commission. I think the fact that ministers sit on the commission is helpful because it helps ministers to understand the role and function of the commission, but it also helps ministers to be able to interface with the commission and express views and be part of the debate. I'm also of the view that it's very important for the president to continue to chair the Climate Commission, because I think that what it does is it gives the commission a status that in a sense helps to ensure that the views of the commission are taken seriously by government. You know, life doesn't come with guarantees, but I think that experience of the current form of the commission, while it's voluntary, I think that it's an important advisory forum, and I think that it's sufficiently close to government that we have evidence that government has listened to its viewpoints and its advice. So I would really want to suggest that that we should keep that current format. The commission holds its meetings in public. All its meetings are live streamed. All the reports of the commission are made public. So I don't think that we have to have concerns about secrecy when it comes to the commission. So I would very much suggest that we allow the current form and to continue. And I think the current form builds in sufficient accountability on the one hand and transparency on the other hand. There's been a lot said around transparency and accountability, and I personally support that in the way that government operates. But I think that we have to understand that transparency and accountability is enshrined in law in our system. And the laws that pertain there are the POPI Act and the PAIA Act. Now, the state law advisor will not allow us to develop another interpretation of those laws. They would consider that our role is to deal with environmental matters and matters of public transparency of government processes are enshrined in law, and our law must synergize with those laws. We can't start to develop provisions in our law over which we have no jurisdiction. So I think it's very important that honourable members understand that, because there won't be approval from the state law advisor, and in due course, supposing that the National Assembly were to make such a decision, it would be very difficult for the president then to sign the bill into law if it were contradicting other pieces of legislation. So I think those checks and balances are always built in so that departments and committees should not trespass into domains which might not be entirely in their purview. So that is what I would want to say, and I would want to suggest that we do allow the officials to show you the text in that regard. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Minister. I am going to request that the person who will be responsible of leading the responses from the department to start with, and then we will discuss after the responses. Thank you. I'm not sure who will be leading.
No, thank you, Chair.
Mr. Amar, okay.
Yes, Chair, I see a hand of Honorable Member. I don't know whether I should go ahead.
Honorable Singh?
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. I thought before the Honourable Minister leaves, just to indicate that the PCC question was mine, and I'm satisfied, with the response from the Minister, because to put it bluntly, we don't want the tail wagging the dog. The Department of Environment, Minister, your department is the responsible department for all environmental matters. And if you are satisfied that the PCC is going to be advisory in nature and not be implementing and kind of quote unquote interfering in the work of the department in the implementation, then I am satisfied with the answer that you've given. But as far as the funding is concerned, I think we were told by the DG that there were going to be discussions with Treasury. So perhaps that will emerge as we get a report from the department. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable
May I
Singh.
respond?
Okay, Minister. I'll afford you that opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Singh, I think that one understands your caution around the tail wagging the dog scenario. But I think that it's also important to remember that the climate transition is not a government transition. It's a whole of society transition. And in fact, when we look at matters that pertain to two aspects, well, in fact, all aspects of the Paris Agreement, whether we're talking about mitigation, adaptation, or means of implementation, the whole of society is actually going to be involved in that process. And so I think building in an institution like the Climate Commission is very important, because if you have a whole of society transition, you want to make sure that you're taking the whole of society with you. We all know here, because we have had many of these debates, that there are winners and losers. There are people who can be left behind. There are important issues of climate justice. So I think that we don't want the tail wagging the dog, but we also don't want to believe that this transition is an easy one, and that all other role players in society shouldn't be an integral part of making it happen. And then I think that the way we have crafted the clause on the mechanism, we are in discussion with National Treasury, but I think we have crafted it such that the major consultation can be at the time of the development of the regulations, and we don't have to hold up this process now. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Mr. Amar, before you proceed with the responses, let me just remind the department that you were supposed to send this presentation to us before, for members to deliberate, to be able to deliberate, because now we are only interfacing this presentation now. However, we will try, and also I believe that members will also try. But I wanted to raise that please do not handicap us. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Amar.
No, thank you, Chair. Good morning, honorable members. Good morning, honorable Minister. And Chair, your guidance is noted. we received 4 questions by email on Friday, and we spent time working on the responses. And the minister has touched on the 2 most important aspects of those questions. The first being the issue of transparency, the POPI and the PAIA information. And the question really revolve around the issue of the importance of disclosing important information to the public for accountability. And it was also raised around what was said is the PCC can decide on which information to share, taking POPI and PAIA into account. And what does the legal say about which information on emission and tracking can be publicly shared? And in the response, Chair, on the column on DFFE response, I think the minister has addressed the issue of working within the regime in terms of the information accessibility, the regime of POPI and PAIA. But from the department, we publish what we call the greenhouse gas emission report on an annual basis against the trajectory on the national greenhouse gas inventory. And these reports and information on tracking the emissions against the trajectory becomes accessible to the public, for the public to can really have a sense of where we are as a country in terms of emission reduction. And these reports set out and analyze the emission trends, including the detailed reports on the changes in the greenhouse gas emission intensity in the economy, and they also compare the actual greenhouse gas emission against the national greenhouse gas trajectory. And they also fit into our international obligations as we build our report to the international sphere. If you can keep on scrolling up, Swisish, I would appreciate. Chair, I still see page 1. Maybe it is the internet. But just to confirm that we're still seeing page 1. Chair, we included the clauses considering the public consultation on the issue of publication on a number of instruments into the bill. And these include the publication in the bill is not limited only to the National Greenhouse Gas Emission Report, but extend to other planning instruments, both the strategies, the assessments, the needs assessment, and the response plans. We have included the wording of ensuring that this instrument can be published and can be accessible to the public, and that is noticeable as well in the proposed clauses in 15.1 and 19A, where the word publish is inserted. But as a principle, I think is to emphasize that where the instruments and the reports are being developed, they should be published to ensure that accessibility. There's also a question around the PCC reports being made available to the public. And indeed, that is also included, that the reports of the commission must be made available to the public by being publicized on the commission website. And just to indicate again, Chair, that the bill is not going to be able to create a new or a different regime to the POPI and PAIA, as this is not necessarily the domain of this bill, as the minister has articulated. Chair, the second question The second question is around the recommendation of the PCC. As Minister has already indicated that the PCC will continue to play an advisory role, and as such, the recommendation of the PCC are being taken into consideration in the decision making. Maybe to indicate that the bill is very clear that this bill will bind all organ of state, and to an extent where the PCC make recommendation, this has to be duly considered and be taken into consideration when decisions are made, and in as much as they are an advisory, but they are recommendation will have to be taken into consideration when decisions are made. And there are existing safeguards and process to ensure that the PCC recommendation and advice is really considered in the decisions, and of course in the implementation of various instruments. And this can also be taken into account, looking at the Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act. And of course, additionally, we believe that Parliament can, given the fact that the recommendation will be available, will be open to the public, Parliament can also play an oversight role to see how those elements are integrated or considered. There is a third question, Chair, around, I don't know, my screen is frozen, but I believe that from you, Chair, and honorable members, you are able to see the screen moving. On my side, I think it's the broadband. And may I also request that I put off the video and see, because yeah, it is now moving. It's very slow on my side. But there is a third question, Chair, on the concern around the non-implementation of the Act. Once the Act is enacted, it gives ministers power to make regulations, and I think there's issue around what then happen with what are the sanctions that will the minister give to her colleagues and other departments for not complying. In terms of the details of managing the reporting, Chair, we clear that this will be clearly articulated into the regulations, and this regulation will be consulted. But this is really an intergovernmental process where structures such as the MINTEC, the MINMEC process, of course, guided by the Relation Framework Act, where they will be able to monitor and ensure that this reporting, particularly from other sectoral departments, is taking place. And of course, the role of the planning and monitoring and evaluation in ensuring that, on the monitoring and evaluation of some of the interventions are being considered. I think just to really emphasize that government operate on the basis of the Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act. So as such, the regulation will detail how the reporting would be managed. The last question, Chair, is the one that I think the Minister responded to adequately on the issue of the finance mechanism, or the mechanism that will enable that the Minister will prescribe to support and or finance the climate change response, planning, implementation, by the national, provincial, and local government in consultation with the Minister of Finance, just to indicate that this mechanism will really, take into account the technical support, as the Minister indicated, to raise resources that might come, others from the donor funding, from the fiscus, and this mechanism will, in essence, support, the various spheres of government, particularly the provincial and the local sphere, to to implement the provisions of the bill, which include, among others, the planning instruments that we continue to support them, and the implementation of the response plan. And we believe that this proposition can be inserted into Chapter 3, just under clause 15.5 of Chapter 3, in clause 15, where the chapter focused largely on climate change response on provinces and municipalities. We believe that we can slot this clause in here. And by prescribed, it means that the minister would be able to develop the regulations in a more transparent and responsive manner, and all stakeholders will be consulted to ensure that they participate in the process, and the regulation will be tabled, of course, consistent with section 101, 3 and 4 of the Constitution, which provide that the proclamation, regulation, and other instrument of subordinate legislation must be accessible to the public. So in essence, Honorable Chair and honorable members, this clause will really be empowering to establish the mechanism to can really create that support mechanism, whether we're able to have technical support from various technical partners. That mechanism will be able to really house those type of support to support the provincial and the national and the local sphere of government in terms of the responsibility in implementing the clauses. Just to indicate, I think Minister has indicated that, of course, there would be ongoing engagement with Ministry of Finance on this. But as he indicated, that really this clause is just to ensure that there's no holdup, but we create an empowering clause to address the mechanism that will really mobilize and get resources to support the implementation. And the detailed architecture of the clause would be really defined very clearly into the regulations. Honorable Chair, these are the 4 questions that we received, and indeed we received the guidance. We will definitely respond, make sure that we submit to the honorable members in advance, but we were also doing some internal consultation and engaging also with trying to get inputs from our colleagues in National Treasury. Thank you, Chair, and I am going to hand over to you on this received question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Amar. I see the hand of Honorable Winkler. Do you want to raise something, Honorable Winkler, with regards to the questions? Honorable Winkler?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just with regard, so I've got two questions, but just with regard to the recommendations of the Presidential Climate Commission, I had submitted the question on what happens should government departments, for example, reject the recommendations of the Commission. What support or legal framework does the PCC have in that case? And what would the response be if a department says, well, we don't want to implement your recommendation, for example? The second is on the transparency. And I think the transparency and I think accountability is a key point that was raised by numerous stakeholders in the submissions. And it's one of the most important, I think, aspects of this climate change bill. Now, given the fact that there are a number of capacity constraints within government, and the fact that we need transparency to hold major emitters and companies accountable, and then to, of course, put the pressure on these entities in order to change their behavior. It's actually really critical that civil society has access to the greenhouse gas emissions data and all other related information, and that companies need to disclose this. So the responses from the department have been either that the data is already available or that there are poppy and pyre constraints. Now, the thing is that on page 259, the department responded that the GHG inventory is accessible to the public as such reports were made available to the public. Now, the problem is that you're actually not able to access facility level GHG emissions data. And even the Presidential Climate Commission, when they were trying to locate the GHG emissions data for Eskom as part of its monitoring work, was not able to access this data and had to submit a PIRE request. Now, the problem with this is that I don't understand why the PIRE and poppy are a constraint on the types of data that should be made publicly available. Unless there's personal information involved, which can always be redacted. I think that if we're talking about the types of emissions, the mitigation plans, and how companies or entities and Eskom are tracking according to these mitigation plans, how are these in violation of PIRE and poppy to such an extent that they cannot be made publicly available on the tracking on the website? So just a question, are the GHG emissions data from South Africa's top emitting facilities publicly available online today? If so, where? And how easy is it for members of the public to actually access this information? As I said, many stakeholders have motivated for the bill to provide more proactive disclosure of data and records by both persons conducting listed activities and by the DFFE and other government departments. In what way, as I said, does the department say such proactive disclosure of data contradict PIRE and poppy? Given that poppy applies to personal information, what personal information does DFFE expect to find in the GHG emissions mitigation plans and data reports? If such personal information is included, could not such information actually be redacted before this is disclosed? Can the DFFE commit to list all documents generated under the Climate Change Act as automatically available under PIRE? Will these documents then be made available on the public website like the NCCIS so that members of the public do not first have to request the documents anyway? And then the DFFE says on page 342 that the National Climate Change Information System already exists and shall be used to add more climate-related information that is referred to in the Climate Change Bill. Exactly what information will be added to the NCCIS? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Winkler. Mr. Amar?
No, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to also invite my colleague.
Mr. Romaro, Chairperson, just before Mr. Romaro comes in, because I must go, can I just one comment?
Yes, you can, Minister.
Chair, I think that on the issue of the Climate Commission, I think that it's important that we understand what we're trying to achieve here. And what we're trying to achieve is a balance. On the one hand, we want the Climate Commission to be able to give advice about the views of all sections of society on the climate transition. Remember, scientific evidence and scientific advice is developed by the International Panel of the UNFCCC. So that advice, scientific advice is what guides all signatories of the UNFCCC. But the Climate Commission's primary role is to be giving advice about how the transition will be facilitated in the context of all the different actors that would be included in the Climate Commission. Now, if government gets advice from a presidential commission, and if it chooses to ignore that advice, given the fact that everything that the PCC does is public, government will have to be able to explain in public why they are ignoring that advice. And what we all understand in politics is if you ignore good advice, there's a price to pay. So these things can't be legislated. There's no guarantee that people will always listen to good advice. But the point is that in a democracy, if as an executive authority you choose not to listen to good advice, you better have a good reason why you're not doing that. Because we know that there are enough checks and balances in our system, whether those checks and balances are judicial review, the role of the Fourth Estate, the role of the National Assembly, all of those checks and balances are going to mean that if as executive authorities you choose to ignore the Commission, you're going to have a very good reason for doing that. So I think that what we're trying to achieve here is balance between those who have a mandate to lead government, and balance between those who have a legislative mandate to give advice to that government. So let me just, that is my comment on that one. On the others, Mr. Romaru will explain, but I think that what's important for Honourable Winkler to understand is that we are setting up the architecture for emissions disclosures. At the moment, it's still voluntary. It won't be voluntary in the future. But that architecture is in the process of being set up, and part of what this bill does is make it mandatory. So I think Honourable Winkler is asking for things which may not yet be available. But this is the architecture that the bill is going to be ensuring in due course becomes mandatory. But I'm sure Mr. Whitty will explain that in much greater detail. Thank you very much, Chairperson, and allow me to excuse myself.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Mr. Romaru, can you?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for covering the one on the Presidential Commission. Chair, on the issue of reporting availability of data and the list of reports that are available on the National Climate Information System, I'm going to ask Mr. John Kiwit just to explain what is in the system, what is available, and how the entire issue of reporting and facility level JG data as indicated it's being managed. Mr. Whitty.
Thanks, Lo. Good morning, Honourable Chair and Honourable Members and Honourable Minister and colleagues. Yes, indeed, in terms of what we have, currently we have three instruments that we have developed to manage emissions from industry. The first one is the reporting program of emissions. So on an annual basis, companies submit their emissions for the previous year. So that's the one instrument that is legislated in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions reporting regulations and has been running since 2017 and also automated since 2019. We also have the carbon budgets. That is the allocation of emission limits to companies. That process started in 2016. However, those budgets, as the minister indicated, is voluntary. So we're essentially waiting for this bill and the regulations linked to it for us to make that mandatory. So that information, is credible and is based on sound methodologies. Then the third instrument is what we call the pollution prevention plans. Those will become what we call mitigation plans once the bill has been passed into law. This is where companies report the actions that they are taking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So in terms of the emission reports that I spoke about earlier on, companies are reporting on those online in our system called the South African Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reporting System. As the minister indicated, we are still developing this platform. What we do not have at the moment is the platform for publishing the information, and that will be developed especially once the bill is passed. And because also the important thing is to understand the information that should be made publicly available. I think DDG Vanessa Bandeman I think about 2 weeks ago did highlight that in terms of handling the prior request, there is Regulation 15, which requires that the department must have a catalog of information that can be made available and that which cannot be made available. And what we need for us to be able to do that is the development of the regulations for the carbon budgets. So for the emissions, I think that's straightforward, and those have been handled through the prior request. But for the integrated regulations on carbon budgets and pollution and mitigation plans, once those are in place, it will then allow us to then catalog the information that can be made publicly available. And then that will then allow us to develop a platform that takes the information that can be publicly available and be presented. So that's where we are. And then in terms of the question around the current climate change information and what information we have there, particularly around climate change mitigation. So what we do on a biannual basis, we do an assessment of all the interventions that we have been implementing in South Africa on climate change mitigation and what is their effects on, number one, the total emissions saved, but number two, to what an extent is that helping us to meet our domestic or international targets, and that gets published. So we will extract that information and have it published in some of the reports that we produce, for example, the biannual update report and also the national communication reports. And also in terms of the MTSF, we do have targets that we have to report on an annual basis, the extent to which we are meeting our targets or not. So all of that information is available. But in terms of information around carbon budgets and mitigation plans, we're currently handling that through prior request. And once the carbon budgets become mandatory, we will be able to catalog appropriately the information that must be made publicly available. I hope that helps clarify the issue. Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
You want to make some additions, Mr. Rahman?
Yes, Chair, I wanted to allow legal to also reflect on this because it has some legal elements as well.
Okay, then.
Thanks,
Chair,
Chair.
sorry to interject. The Honourable Brian can't seem to get back into the committee. If someone could just give him
It's fine. I'm back. I'm back in. Thanks so much, Honourable Winker. Thanks. I did get back in. Thank you.
Honourable Bryant, I see you have raised your hand. Can we allow the responses then? I will afford members an opportunity to discuss. I see your hand.
Yes, 100%, Chairperson. I don't want to break the flow of the presenter, so let him continue, and I'll ask my question afterwards if that's right. Thank you.
Okay then. Okay. You may continue, legal advice.
No, thank you, Chair, and good morning to the honourable members and colleagues. No, from my side, I think Minister and Jonge have covered the POPI-related aspects. But I think Honourable Winkler wanted to know especially about the company-specific information, whether that will be availed or not. But then I think the responses were adequate. I just wanted to add that the PCC will also develop POPI guidelines and PIA guidelines, which will then guide the public in terms of how specific information, company-specific information can be obtained, whether in full format or in redacted format. So members of the public will be guided by those PIA and POPI manuals as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant, Honorable Bryant, do you want to raise some question?
Thanks very much, Chairperson. I'm sorry for asking it after the fact. I got, unfortunately, my signal died and then I couldn't get back in. But I think there's 2 points, but they're interlinked. and they're a bit broad, but it's with regards to the Presidential Climate Commission in general. And I think one of the concerns that seems to have come through in some of these public consultations, both the virtual ones that we've had with the NGOs and some of the other interest groups, as well as during the public hearings, has been almost a concern around the potential impact on South Africa's sovereignty. One doesn't want to kind of overblow the issue, but because of the fact that there are many external role players involved in the climate change space, when it comes to decision making, when it comes to empirical evidence and information, I think one of the things that perhaps some members of the public have shown concern around is that the commission itself could potentially be used to further interests that might not always necessarily be aligned with South Africa's own political internal interests. Now, I don't know whether that viewpoint is necessarily founded in truth. As the Minister has said, in many aspects, the PCC is functioning effectively. But I think a way to allay that concern, that perhaps in the absence of a significant number of politicians serving on the PCC, that the political discourse, the political discussions could potentially be hijacked or taken over by the interest groups that are represented on that, be they inclined one way or the other. And I think possibly a way for us to allay those fears is to ensure that in the description of the functions and the reporting lines of the Climate Commission, I think it's section 11 or 12, that it is mentioned quite clearly that the Climate Commission must report regularly either to a portfolio committee as designated. Currently it sits within the DFFE, and to Parliament in general, so that Parliament is able to ensure that those reporting lines are maintained on a regular basis. At present, it only states that the PCC has to report to government, or may be required to report to government. I think if we can ensure that there is regular, transparent communication on the activities of the PCC, so that these can also be interrogated if need be by the politicians who have been directly elected by the population of South Africa to represent them, to ensure that those voices are also heard, and that information is properly shared. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Brian. Honorable Winkler, I've noted your hand. I also have a question to the department on one of their responses on penalties for non-compliance with the carbon budget. They said it is being considered under the amendments of the Carbon Tax Act. Then it is fine that the principles of changing higher rate above the carbon budget allocation has been agreed upon. However, I have a question. Does this mean that there will be no higher penalties implemented until the carbon tax is amended, and which could take years? So which years are we referring to for the amendment of the Carbon Tax Act? I wanted to raise that question. Honorable Winkler, you can speak.
Thank you, Acting Chair. So just a response on the disclosure of data. So I did ask if the GHG emissions data from South Africa's top 10 emitting facilities is actually publicly available today. And if so, where? And how easy is it for individuals to access this information? And will this information likely be then published once the bill is implemented on the NCCIS or not. And then just with regard to timeframes, a lot of the submissions from various stakeholders spoke about the urgency of implementation throughout the bill. And some of the responses were that the submission is noted timeframe to be considered, possibly 1 year, wording to be finalized in consultation with the OCSLA and OPLA. And this was in response to the CER submission on timeframes. And it says that the timeframes to be considered, the wording will still be finalized. Now, in the CRR, the DFA has indicated that it was reconsidering various timeframes in the bill in response to stakeholder comments. This is on page 246 and 267. What adjustments have been made to the timeframes in the bill in consultation with the OCSL and OPLA? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Winkler. Mr. Amaro and the team, can you respond?
Thank you, Chair. I am going to ask Jongi to come particularly on this access to data facility. If he can come on that, and also touch a bit on the penalty on the carbon tax, Chair, just to indicate that this has been an ongoing discussion with National Treasury as part of the alignment between this bill and the carbon tax. And in the very earlier version, there was, of course, a clause that was clearly indicative that any exceedance will be charged at the higher rate. But we were advised then by the state law advisor that at this stage, because this does not exist in the carbon text, there is it should not be referenced into the current bill because it's not yet stated into the carbon text. Hence the ongoing work with National Treasury around the issue of amendment. I think it was the issue of a legal issue that you cannot reference it given the fact that it does not necessarily exist in the carbon text. But I'm going to allow Jongi to come in here and ask Sbusiso as well to come in here, and then we will then reflect on the one on the timeframes. Jongi.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe, and thanks, Honorable Chair. Yes, I think Chloe has highlighted the overview in terms of where we are with the use of the carbon tax, to act as an instrument for penalizing non-compliance with carbon budget. So generally, Treasury does on a year-to-year basis the amendments to their carbon tax bill as and when required, because as they implement the carbon tax, they encounter new challenges or new areas where they have to improve. So on a year-to basis, they might announce changes. So as Chloe correctly says, from their side, they cannot trigger any amendments until the bill and the regulations are passed into law, which then gives them a legal basis for which they can then effect the amendments. One of those amendments will be a clear guidance on, what will be done in terms of penalizing non-compliance. Having said that, obviously they have over the past few years indicated or sort of highlighted that one of the means that will be done is a higher tax rate on emissions above the carbon budget. So, for example, if you emitted 110 tons and your carbon budget was 100 tons, so it means you'll pay a higher tax rate on that extra 10 million tons of emission. So, drafting that will not take them that much time, and it will be a quick process. And generally, their amendments are quite quick because they've established a process of fast-tracking that process. Then in terms of the disclosure, I must apologize if I wasn't clear at the beginning, but I did indicate that currently in terms of the emissions reporting program, that has been in existence since 2016. and it is automated now, so companies go online and they find the information. But as the minister indicated, since we are still developing this architecture, what that system currently doesn't have is a public platform where the emissions of information of those companies is made publicly available, and that will be addressed once the bill is passed into law. That's not just on those emissions, but also the carbon budgets and the mitigation plan information. What has been happening now is those have been managed largely through the PIA request. And one of the biggest challenges here is also compliance with the Competition Act, because there is information that if it were to be diverged might compromise competition. Chair, you'll recall that maybe about, say, 8 or 10 years ago, industry associations used to publish activity or productivity-based information for the sectors that they're responsible for. But because of the introduction of the Competition Act, that's no longer available. During those periods, we did not have the reporting program, so we actually relied on that information, and we can use it to determine what the emissions are for that sector. So those are some of the aspects for consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I see the hand of Honorable Singh. And after that, colleagues, I would request that we move to the presentation of the updated 50-page presentation so that we don't run out of time. Honorable Singh.
Oh, thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Chairperson, just a couple of issues. I know the Minister is not with us, but perhaps as a committee, we need to request from the Minister some timeline on, these discussions with National Treasury when she can report back, because I don't think we should leave it open-ended. That's the first issue. And then the second issue relates to something that I was in Mozambique recently, and I was requested to speak on the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is a mechanism that the EU want to impose where they will have penalties and things like that. I think it starts in October, but implementable from 2026. I just want to know to what extent will CBAM, which they call it CBAM, have an impact on this bill and what we are putting on this bill? And is that a separate matter that we would need a briefing on? And then the last, the other issue would be the question of the clear pathways like there've been in the energy sector as we transition. I mean, there's a Just Energy Transition Investment Plan that's going to come up. Now, how is that going to be funded and that sort of thing, the finance mechanisms? I know that there was 8.4 billion or something that was allocated, but I don't think we've utilized a cent of that. And that money we heard from the minister falls within the ambit of the presidency. So how does that align, gel with what we are doing here in terms of just energy transition? And lastly, just a comment, perhaps, National Treasury needs to have a meeting with COPTA just to align projected climate disasters and preparedness, because there's reference to that in our bill. So perhaps there needs to be a meeting of those departments, and then we get a report back on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Singh. Honorable Bryant, I see your hand is up. Do you want to make a...
Yes, Chair, sorry, it was just my question that I posed was with regards to whether or not one could look at including a provision within the bill, either section 11, 12, when it comes to the Climate Commission, just to state that the Commission should or must report back regularly to the relevant portfolio committee on their activities, and whether that is being considered. I know I should know every page of the 600 pages by now, but just to check whether or not that is being considered as one of the amendments going forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Bryant. Mr. Amaro, can you and the team, can you respond to these questions? And thereafter, we will move to the presentation on the updated 50-page presentation. if members want to make some additional questions, I would request or propose that you send those questions, honorable members. Just for the sake of the flow and the proceeding of the meeting, can we then move now to another presentation? Thank you. Mr. Amaro, just respond and the team, and then we go to the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I think the first one on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, I think in particular the DTIC, Department of Trade, would be very central in really providing some briefing on this, just to make sure that it has some trade elements. And of course, we understand that it is also have some climate related elements. So it will be important to really have a detailed briefing, Chairperson. The issue of a just transition, Chair, as you're well aware, this is being handled through the presidency. And I think they really are the one who can provide a very detailed presentation on the work that is ongoing on the just transition and just energy transition. And I think, Chair, it will be important to maybe get a view from or a briefing in that respect. I think Honorable Dave is making an important issue around reporting and on whether a consideration can be made for the PCC to provide on regular basis report, in particular, I think to the portfolio committee. And I think I will hear from the legal colleagues, but I think, Chair, if they are listed as an entity to a greater extent, there should be that level of reporting. And in my view, it can be coordinated, Chair, even through the portfolio committee. But I will also ask legal to guide on this. I think it's not something that is really very difficult to do, Chair. Chair, the issue around the time frames, and I think maybe I will ask Busiso to respond on this. The time frames, Chair, that are in the bill, they start from chapter 3, where we talk about within 1 year of the publication of the bill, there should be a strategy, that the national adaptation strategy that will be published, and within 2 years, there should be a clear climate change needs and response assessment being undertaken at the municipality. So the times are synchronized in a sense that we will have a national plan and national scenarios where we develop what you call the scenarios and the projections and the assessments. And this national plan and the national assessments will therefore inform any other layer below the national, the sectoral government, the provincial, and the local sphere of government. So they are synchronized, Chair, in a manner that would really enable an alignment, taking also into consideration that we wouldn't want planning to be business as usual, and will ensure that there should be technical support to ensure alignment. And this, Chair, does not necessarily stop the implementation of the current instruments that are on the table. And I want to address the issue of agency, because at current, there are a number of planning instruments that have been developed in support with the national office to the province and the sectors and the local sphere. And those instruments are still being implemented. So when the bill is now enacted into Act, Chair, we're going to go back and ensure that there is a proper alignment of all the instruments. And the review, Chair, we're saying 5 years because the impact of implementation, it might take time to be noticed and assessed on ground. So we need to allow a good period of implementation of instruments so that we'll be able to do an assessment and see if there is a review that will be required for those planning instruments. In essence, the projection chair take even a longer period span. When they're doing climate change projection, they will project to 10 years, 20 years, and so forth. And that will be built into the review processes, Chair. And I'm going to allow Sibusiso to come in on this issue of time frame, because we also noted, Chair, the inconsistency with the big report and the SASIN report, because the SASIN report, that's where we really, we're engaging and getting guidance and making adjustment. So we would need to ensure that we are able now to ensure consistency of some of the elements of responses with the 620-page document. Sibusiso, you want to come in here on the time frame? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ramaro.
No, thank you, Chair. On the issue of timeframes, we've really considered the comments, and we applied our minds around that. In fact, there were quite detailed discussions. Others suggested that maybe let's remove the timeframes and put them in the regulations. But for regulatory certainty, we then resolved that the timeframes must be kept in the Act, so that there is certainty. But also, it is important for the committee to note that some of the timeframes are qualified by the wording "at least." So that word "at least" then suggests that there is some element of flexibility. So meaning timeframes can be more or less. So I would just urge members to then consider the use of the wording "at least" in some of the timeframes. Some of the timeframes were really impractical to change based on the suggestions, because, for example, with reviews normally take 5 years. So it then becomes impractical to change the time frame from 5 years to downwards to 2 years, because you need, as Joe said, you need to allow for these plans and strategies to be implemented, and then from the benefit of experience and insight, we are able to then undertake the reviews. So we have made adjustments in the bill. I think in the presentation that Joe is going to do, he will indicate some of the areas where we've reviewed the timeframes to address the comments received. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kobesa. Mr. Ramaro, you are done with the responses?
Yes, Chair. Unless if there is any response that we might have missed, Chair, we can be reminded so that we cover it. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Let us then proceed to the presentation. Mr. Ramaro, who is leading the presentation?
Chair, I will lead it. I'm just going to ask Sibusiso to substitute.
Flight it. Okay.
Yes, flight it. Move from the responses to a 50-page one, Sibusiso.
Can we have a 5-minute break before we continue with proceed? Just 5-minute break so that we can just drink water.
Recording stopped.
We'll be back at, now it's 11:25. We'll be back at 11:30.
Chloe, I just want to make 2 comments. Are you on mute?
Sorry? Oh, I thought someone was saying something.
Sorry, you were not on mute.
Kedakancho, they're speaking with you. Acting Chair, they're speaking with you. Mute, then they want to speak with you.
I've muted, Engineer.
Yeah, there's a lady who wants to speak with you. I think it's from the department. Okay.
He wants to speak to me privately or yeah.
I think so, yes.
No, it's not you, Chair. It's not you, Chair.
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank
Okay
you.
then.
Thank you, Chair.
Colleagues, it's 11:30 now. Can we proceed with our meeting?
Recording in progress.
Are we all back? Colleagues, can we proceed with our meeting? It's 11:30 now. Mr. Amaro?
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, this is the 50-page document which we have presented, I think, in the previous week. And in terms of its structure, Chair, I'm going to ask my colleague to keep on moving. If you can move upwards a bit. And Chair, help me if it's not moving on your side, because it seems to be slow on my side, but I have another screen where I'll be.
It has moved, Mr. Close. So
Okay,
definitely.
now it seems to be my delay on the system. Chair, it has three parts. The first part is part A, which deals with written comments, where we have recommended amendments to the bill. And we have part 2, Chair, that deals with oral and written comments with no recommended amendments. And we have part C that deals with comments related to other stakeholders, other departments, and other municipalities. On the first one, Chair, it is a clause, a definition clause by SASOL. And I think the recommendation is to include the resilience, which has been considered and being recommended for inclusion into the definition, Chair. The second one is on clause 7. This is on the title section on the alignment of policies. And I think it is recommended that the wording law be included on the alignment, which would therefore mean that in the revised version, it should read as every organ of state that exercise power to perform function that is affected by climate change entrusted and duties at the achievement, promotion and protection of sustainable must review, if necessary, revise, amend, coordinate, harmonize their policies and laws. And on that alignment, Chair, it also has been considered positively for inclusion. Same on clause 7, Chair. I think it was the issue of, in addition to organized labor, civil society being identified as being able to advise climate change response, we need to include research organization, communities should be expressly identified, and we then make a proposition there of on 7.2 in order to give effect to the principle and object set out into the Act. We included the inclusion of relevant stakeholders, meaning that organized labor, civil society, business, and relevant stakeholders may advise. And on this relevant stakeholders, Chair, it will be inclusive of course, the research organization, academia, and community as necessary, Chair. We thought that the relevant stakeholders will really enable that clauses. Chair, on clause 10, I think the bigger elements really are on clause 10. This is dealing with the establishment of the Presidential Climate Commission. And of course, I mean, there has been a number of issues raised, one around the period of appointment and renewal. The process of appointing the PCC should be open and transparent. And the clause 10 should specify the appointment by the president as a commissioner will be for a period not exceeding 5 years. These are some of the comments that were coming. And the criticism that clause does not provide clarity on who the PCC reports to in the current format. And to enhance transparency, accountability, and coordination. The Commission should report to the climate forums, and Chapter 4 should be chaired by the Minister responsible for environment, as some of the suggestion. And Chair, we have considered these inputs, and we proposed the amendments one recommending that the commission be chaired by the president, and the commission must be established in terms of the act, and the legal status of the commission must be also clarified. And just to indicate that the commission will continue to exist in its current form, and the modalities will include the finalization of the feasibility study. This is in terms of the independent entity process that can be undertaken with the National Treasury. And in that there are a lot of proposals, Chair, on this. One, that the Presidential Climate Commission will continue to exist. And the second is the minister must ensure that they must ensure the continued existence of the commission is compliant with the Financial Management Act. And the Presidential Commission, once listed as an entity under the PFMA, will have a full legal capacity as a juristic person and will be independent and impartial. And the commission must appoint not more than 30 members who will serve as commissioners, which include representative but not limited to government, civil society, and business. And the government representation must include relevant ministers that would be co-opted to the commission, and the commissioners must be appointed for a period of 5 years, renewable for a further final period of 5 years, meaning that is 2 terms, combined, making it 10 years, just to clarify that appointment. And it will be chaired by the president, and the president must appoint the deputy chair and clarify the role of the deputy chair, which perform the function in the absence of the chairperson, and the Presidential Commission may determine its own procedures. On the functions, Chair, clause 11, I think there was an issue around the functions there, where there's a recommendation that the amendment must include a new C, which says advise government on any socio-economic matters that are related to a just transition. And I think this was, coming from a comment that there seems to be unhappiness that with the drive to discontinue coal-fired power stations. So I believe that as an advisory, it really needs to look deeper into the socio-economic matters related to a just transition. Same on clause 11, there is also an inclusion there of the Presidential Climate Commission may establish committees to assist it in the performance of its function, and it may delegate such function to the committee. And these, Chair, are technical committees to ensure that the work and the advisory is scientifically evidence-based. And I recall in our first presentation, there was a concern raised by honorable members on the may and the must, to say probably we might want to consider not leave it to the discretion of the commission to establish those technical committees that can support it as part of its work. And there was a recommendation I remember which says maybe we must put it as a must, but I think honorable members can really provide guidance on that. Chair, on clause 12, there was an issue around the process of appointing the commissioners needs to be open, transparent, and we then considered this and recommend that before appointing the commission, in terms of section 10.4, the president must issue a notice in the Gazette and at least 2 nationally circulated newspapers to invite nomination. In such notices, specify the period of which the nomination must be submitted and stipulate the procedure adopted regarding such nomination. And this is to ensure that there is participation, transparent process in terms of the nomination of commissioners. And it further goes to outline the role of the commissioners, which is to provide advice to the commission on the climate change response and mitigation impact and the just transition. And or 4 there, that no person shall be appointed as a commissioner unless he or she is a South African citizen. And the commissioner who are not in the employment of state are eligible for remuneration, and the remuneration of commissioners must be determined by the minister in consultation with the Minister of Finance. And I think there, Chair, the bigger issue was to really clarify even the appointment process. As a new clause,
Mr.
Chair?
Amaru, sorry for just 1
Yes.
minute. Sorry
Yes.
for disturbing you. I just need guidance from the members whether we should allow you to present some few pages and then deliberate whether we approve the comment, this clause or not, or the presentation, or we go through the entire presentation and then allow the honorable members. I just need guidance from the members. Must we continue with the entire presentation, or we stop at clause 15, we deliberate and then continue? Honorable members?
Honorable Chair, I think, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. It would be nice if we can short pages like at clause 15, do what we have to do and move forward. I don't know how the others feel, but I think I will prefer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Weber. Other members? Do you
Yes,
agree?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with that plan of taking at least up to clause 15, deliberate, and come back and continue.
Okay, thank you, honorable members. Sorry, Mr. Amaru, for that disturbance. Apologies.
No, it's fine, Chair. I think it gives me guidance as well. Thank you, Chair. On clause, I think I was on 12A, Chair. On the key issue there was the appointment of the executive director, that the act needs to be clear that the minister must appoint a person with appropriate qualification and experience as the executive director. And the executive director is the accounting authority who must perform the function of the office, and the person appointed would hold office for an agreed term not exceeding 5 years, which is renewable for a further period of no longer than 5 years, meaning that is 2 terms. And on the terms and conditions determined by the minister, which must include the salary, allowance, benefit, and yes. And new clause 12B, these are new clauses. The bill must be amended to provide the whole issue of accountability and financial administration, where the proposed amendment recommend that we include a financial administration. The commission must comply with the provisions of the PFMA, and the commission must be funded from monies appropriated by Parliament for that purpose, to the departmental vote in terms of the PFMA, and may receive by way of grants, donation, and inheritance from any social partner or any sources, whether inside or outside the country, in accordance with the fundraising strategy, and the money appropriated by Parliament for this purpose constitute earmarked funds on the minister's departmental vote, may not be used for any by the Commission for any other purpose without Parliament approval. And the funding strategy that is contemplated in 2B provide that funding, amongst others, must be unconditional funding towards the fulfillment of the function of the Commission, will not result in any conflict of interest for the Commission or any commissioner, and must be disclosed in full in accordance with the Act and applicable legislations, and all grant donation must be disclosed in the annual report, and this must be itemized. On clause 13, I think the Presidential Commission must provide report, or any report it provide to government. I think this is the focus on the reporting. I'm just providing summary, Chair. And on this, I think there is, of course, an amendment where the Commission must annually submit a report to the Minister on its activities and performance of its function, including the implementation of the approved strategic plan. And in addition, the Commission must annually, within 6 months after the end of each financial year, submit to the Minister the report on the overall control of the Commission's administration, the reports on the financial statement and audited reports. And the Commission must furnish with such additional information, in particular as the Minister may from time to time require in writing, in connection with the activities and the function of the Commission. And if the Commission fail to comply, the Commission must promptly submit a written explanation setting out the reasons for the delay, and the Minister must table in the National Assembly the report submitted in terms of subsection 1 and 2, and within 15 business days after receiving the report from the Commission. If the National Assembly is not then sitting, within 15 days after the commencement of the next sitting, the President may require the Commission to provide a report on any advice and guidance it provides to government in terms of their functions. And the report of the Presidential Climate Commission must be made available, Chair, on the website for easy access. Clause 14, Chair, I think the focus was on the Commission having its own secretariat, and the proposed amendment there is the Executive Director must appoint the secretariat of the Presidential Climate Commission in consultation with National Treasury, and the Secretariat is responsible for the management of the administrative affairs of the Climate Change Commission, the preparation of meetings and running of the day-to-day. Chair, the 15, and I will stop here. 15, Chair, from the Center of Environmental Rights, I think it talks to, one, the issue of the timelines, and the issue of ensuring that these instruments, climate change needs assessment and response plans are made accessible to the public. And on this, Chair, the agreeable was to the insertion of ensuring that they are being published, and the insertion of qualifying of the timeline, say at least within 1 year, and where there are timelines, there is that qualifying of putting at least, and where there are instruments, Chair, there it will be an indication that this instrument has to be published. And I think Sbusiso has touched extensively on this issue of timeline. Chair, I will stop here and allow you, Chair, to guide us further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ramar. Honorable members, can we then I see the hand of Honorable Bryant, Honorable Webber, Honorable Winkler. Yeah. You can start, Honorable Bryant. I've noted.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you. Thanks to report, for the report. And, you know, it is great to see that these inputs are being taken into consideration and that relevant amendments have been put together. And I think it does send out a good message to the general public that the time that they've taken to submit these concerns hasn't been in vain, as is sometimes the case with public participation processes. Just in terms of clause 13, and it's what we discussed just before we got into this report, and the official mentioned that the department wouldn't be opposed to the idea of submitting a amendment which would state that the Commission's reports should be tabled on a regular basis, or the Commission should report on a regular basis to the relevant portfolio committee. And at present, that is the DFFE. And that would be in clause 13 under reporting lines. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Dave. Honorable, I just want to check who's following you. Honorable Webber, Honorable Winkler, and thereafter Honorable Mkono.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm covered with Honorable Bryant regarding the reporting. I have just a small question. I think Honorable Winkler will speak about it, but the technical committees that the VPC will appoint and everything, I'm just a little bit concerned that there's I don't know what is the word, it's too much freedom, because we're fighting for the technical teams and they need to be there. But will there be a criteria that they will be guided then in the sense? I mean, they have full freedom on how to structure their processes and everything, but I believe we need to put a criteria, and the open and transparencies and the way they're skilled and the way finances will be happening in these technical teams that we do see is very, very important. I don't know if there should be just the criteria to ensure that these technical teams are appointed or the processes followed are correct. I hope I make sense regarding that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Webber. Honorable Winkler.
Thank you, Acting Chair. So my question is with regard to the timelines. If we could just scroll down, please, to the department's response there. I think it was clause 15. Yes, so here the department has only accepted the amendment of publish as every 5 years, not 2 years. Now, given the gravity of the climate change crisis and the fact that review and then implementation of mechanisms to address challenges needs to be taken quite speedily, why is the consideration of 2 years not something the department will consider? Why do you still want to maintain the 5 years, despite the submission by, I think, quite a few stakeholders about the concern over the quite a long timeline for the implementation? Thank you.
Honorable Mkono.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is on the composition of the PCC. In one of the in fact, in many instances, when we're engaging the community, in particular rural communities, there was a concern on the inclusion of traditional leaders. When you go through, which clause is this one, where it talks about the 30 members, commissioners that needs to be that must be appointed. It talks about comprising of government, organized labor, civil society, business, and businesses to advise on the Republic's climate change. And there's been a concern in the in particular in rural communities that we tend to exclude the role of the traditional leaders. I'm just checking if we are including them there, but I think it would be, for me, it would be important to have them included as part of those that should be considered in terms of the presidential commission going downwards. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mchunu. Mr. Amaro, responses?
No, thank you, Chair. Maybe I'll start from the last one, Honorable Mchunu, on the inclusion of traditional leaders. That is why we made amend to the process. One, it's a process that will be a nomination. But in clause 7, we even included the relevant stakeholders. We are awaiting an enumeration of individual groupings where we say traditional leaders, others will come and need a community-based organization and so forth and so forth. But with the clause that I think we have said that will include relevant stakeholders in the nomination process, the traditional leaders can be nominated to be represented. And we went further to say, but not limited to, which means that when the notice goes out, they need to outline the different capacities that will be required. And we think that with those two amendments, it's quite open without clearly enumerating an individual grouping in this regard. That's the first one. Maybe the one on the time frame, I think we went at length on this to indicate that when we do the projection, the projection are done on a time scale. Say we project the impact of climate change for 5 years, 10 years to 30 years. Then you put in place a response plan. And the response plan has to undergo a process of implementation. And it is necessary for it to be given time for implementation so that we can be able to review in line with the projections. Indeed, the climate change issues are a reality, but if we put every 2 years, it will require that the government will be faced with reviewing instruments within that period, and we might not even see the impact of the implementation of those instruments on the ground. So 5 years seems to be a period that is being used even across all the various cycles to enable actual implementation on ground. And I think that's why we thought that the issue of review on a 5-year period really provide adequate time for implementation to can pick up the impact, the inadequacies if they do exist, and be able to come with interventions that would be more impactful within those instruments. That's the review. The technical teams, I think we have put the regulations, the need to develop regulations that can also offer guidance to the Presidential Climate Commission. And I think probably in those regulations, we can just further elaborate that these teams should be representative of different capacities to ensure that they have a balance skill sets to really provide a science-based advice. But these teams, in a way, would they are not going to be managing any resources. I think there was an issue of resourcing. These teams are going to be providing the technical expertise and support to the Presidential Commission. And I think this can be further underscored into the regulations on the need to have a very good skill set that cuts across different scientific disciplines, social science, environmental science, economic science, all the scientific disciplines that are very critical for climate change. I think it's something that can be considered also in the regulation, just to provide that type of guidance. I think Honorable Dave, on the commission being reporting to portfolio committee, and I think I also stand to be corrected. It is my understanding that as an entity of government, the portfolio committee can call the commission from time to time to provide the report on any matters that are critical, irrespective of this even being inscribed in law. It's just my understanding that if they are going to be a listed entity, they can be called to account or report at any given time. But we can get guidance from our legal team, both the state law advisor and our legal team on this aspect that Honorable Dave has raised. But I really think that the portfolio committee has the powers to call them to report at any given time. That's why I say I really did not see it as much of an issue. Chair, I think I tried to cover all the issues, and if I did not cover any, I would really appreciate if I can be guided so that we can cover it. But let me, particularly on the reporting, let me also get the legal team, which to provide some inputs on it, and it can guide Chair on how do you suggest it be addressed. So, would you want to reflect on this?
Yes, thanks for that. No, in fact, on the clause that we're inserting there on reporting, I think we do say that the PCC must submit the reports to minister, the financial report, performance report, and audit report, and the minister must in turn submit same to Parliament. But you are correct that the PC or Parliament has every right to summon the PCC at any time to account on its activities as well. So we support then the proposal for the regular reporting, the PCC to Parliament. I think you've covered most of the questions. I think on the criteria, we can consider inserting wording to the effect that the technical teams must be composed of suitably qualified persons in the specific fields, environment, finance, and so forth. So we can work on that. On the time frames, I think that issue came up again to say, why are we insisting on the 5 years instead of 2 years? On this one, I think it's one of those that are quite impractical because that provision talks about review, and you cannot really review a plan or strategy that you just developed. You need to then allow some time for implementation, and then after some time, you can be in a position to do the necessary assessments and reviews. So that's why we then our position was that let's stick to the 5 years in respect of that specific clause. No, I think you've addressed the issue of representation of traditional leaders sufficiently. Thank you.
No, thank you, Sbusiso. Chair, just to supplement on I got reminded on the review timelines. Chair, I think I want to indicate that every instrument will be subjected to extensive public participation and consultation. and again to ensure that all the review and all the instruments are compliant with the participatory processes. 2 years again would prove to be very difficult. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Amaro. I see the hand of State Law Advisor, Sean van Breda, and I would also like Tilo to have a bite on this before I give to you, Honorable Bryant. Can I allow the two State Law Advisors to respond in some of the questions? Mr. van Breda?
Thank you, Chair. It's not a response to the questions, Chair. It's just for the sake of clarity, for purposes of the A list, Chair. The department did make a presentation this morning regarding the development of regulations in respect of the financing of the implementation of the envisaged Act. I would just like some clarity, Chair. Will that provision, is the intention to include that provision in the amendments? And will that proposed clause be inserted under the financial administration clause? And also perhaps some clarity from the committee as to whether that amendment will be acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And Tilo, are you in the meeting? Can you also say something so that I can give to Honorable Bryant?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, honourable members. So just in terms of the reporting, I just want to reiterate that the department has included that the report must be submitted to the National Assembly. And it is correct that in terms of our oversight, Parliament is able to call any organ to be accountable and to answer. And to report. So we are covered in terms of clause 10 with regards to the reporting. So I have no concerns there. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you, Tilo. Honorable Bryant?
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think the commitment by the officials to ensure that adequate reporting is done back to portfolio committees is welcomed. You see, the challenge here is that we have entities, for instance, that fall under DFFE. So SANBI, SANParks, African Weather Service, etc., who do give us quarterly report backs, give us information on their budgets, etc. And this is done on a regular basis, and we conduct oversight effectively over the functioning of those entities. And the concern is that the PCC, if there isn't a mechanism put in place, and going forward, in a few years' time, who knows, none of us will be serving on these committees, and we might have a completely new batch of people, that a mechanism is in place to ensure that a committee is able to conduct oversight on a regular basis, without having to sort of do a spontaneous summoning of the commission, so that's set out as something which is mandatory, as is in the case of the other entities that provide us with regular reports to our committees. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Bryant. Mama Mkono, I see that your hand is up.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity, and also thank you for the response from the team, the department. But my worry on clause 7, and also on, I think it's clause clause 10, is that we talk about relevant stakeholders, but we also mention some of these stakeholders, because if you talk about organized labor, they are part of the stakeholder, civil society, they are part of the stakeholder, business is part of the stakeholders. So if you start to mention some, I'm not comfortable when you're going to mention some and exclude some that have been raised in particular in the public hearings. But maybe I might be comfortable if we are going to talk about the relevant stakeholders, and then when we go to the regulations, we are able to specify those those stakeholders, in particular those that are closer to the communities, because what we want is it's a bill that will be also talking to the communities more closely, and also maybe but I'll be advised, Chair, by the technocrats, and also when we list the in the addendum or wherever, we do specify those. But if my worry is you start to specify some, but you exclude some, then you talk of the relevant stakeholders, then we are going to create some of these challenges that one is foreseeing. But thank you, Chair. I'm subject to correction by the technocrats.
Thank you, Honorable Mkhize. I just want to respond to Mr. Van Breda, that on that question that he raised on the funding clause, whether it should be included. Yes, I think it should be included in as per agreement and as per the minister's undertaking. So it should be included. And also, Honorable Bryant, I think that the committee, it is also entitled to summon any party of the government, including any entity. And remember, we have done that before. We have called entities that fall under the departments to account that falls under other departments to come and account. So I think the Constitution it gives us that provision. So I think we will not be doing anything wrong if we call those entities or summon them to come to the portfolio committee. Mr. Ramar, can you respond to other questions?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. I think the main question, Chair, is the one on the explicitly mentioning other organization or groupings. And I think this was just to emphasize some of the key groupings that can be included, but we are not completely against including the traditional leaders if the portfolio committee really advise that we include it. We will still qualify by saying but not limited, so that we enable the process to not be overly prescriptive, but allow different capacities to be part of the commission. But I will also be guided by the lawyers, Chair, in this process to see how we can resolve it. But I don't think we're really against including being specific. We were just trying to manage where we will have to enumerate every representation by name or by grouping into the bill. But thanks, and over to you, Chair. But I'm not completely against the inclusion. If there is a strong view that should be included, I can be guided by the lawyer to see how we manage it, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ramaro. I think we need to proceed, and we will end where part one is ending, part A or part one. Then we will end there, we deliberate, then proceed to part B. Can you continue?
Sorry, Chair,
okay.
Just a question of clarity, Chairperson, if possible.
Okay, Honorable Brian.
Thanks very much. Just in terms of the Climate Commission? Because as we mentioned now, it's going to be a formal entity. Is it, where does it sit? Would it formally sit under DFFE as an entity in terms of oversight, as with the other entities that fall under our purview? And if not, where does it sit as an entity in terms of oversight? Because this is a very, very important fact, and it's got nothing to do with whether or not we can summon the commission to come and report to us. That's largely irrelevant. Of course, we can summon them. We can summon anybody to our committee. But the key issue is whether or not there is a compulsion to regularly report back to a committee that consists of political office bearers who are able to regularly interrogate the information and the activities of the commission. And so it's important to establish exactly where the entity is going to sit in terms of oversight and for which portfolio committee that will sit under. Will it formally fall under us as DFFE? Can we confirm that before we move on, if possible?
Mr. Romero, can you respond and then we move?
No. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Honorable Dave, for the the question. And as I understand, and I also rely on the colleagues from legal to help, that the secretariat, which manages the administrative affairs of the PCC, as the secretariat, they would then become the one that account on the administrative work, and they would then be a listed entity in accordance to PFMA. That entity will indeed be, of course, under the department. But I want to get legal to make sure that my interpretation is also not off. Colleagues may assist us on this. And this is my understanding, is to ensure that the accountability to a greater extent refers to the administrative work of the secretariat, and they will be able to report on the administrative work. I see, Chair, there are some hands. Maybe I think the state law advisor can help on this clarification as well. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Van Breda, can you assist?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Regarding the obligations in respect of the PFMA, now, as pointed out by the department, the PCC will be a national entity in terms of the PFMA. So the obligation to report and the oversight role of Parliament is in respect of PFMA, is in respect of financial management. Now, I think that the department did indicate that they would not be opposed to a provision as proposed by the DA, Mr. Bryant, where a provision can be included regarding a regular reporting to the committee. Now, in legislation, what we usually do is provide for reporting to the relevant committee, because, as you know, the title or the committees change, and the roles of parliamentary committees change as well. So we can make a provision to say that regular reporting will be made to the relevant parliamentary committee. So that is the proposal, and I don't think that the department was opposed to it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Van Breda. Honorable Weber, then we move after you and proceed with the presentation after you.
Thank you, Chair. I really think this is a very important point, and the accountability is clear. And Mr. Van Breda just clarified quite a lot. I do think that the department needs to discuss this a little bit, and I like the changes made, but that accountability to the relevant party is very important. And for the time being, it can be DFFE as it changed. but we do need clarity on it next week, if they can discuss it and make a decision on it. But I think this is something that we can't just move on, and this is something that I think needs to be discussed. And we need to get clarity on that next week, if they can do that, so that we can change it, because accountability, and like you know, all of you, that climate change bill is really crucial and very important. And I think that might be, reporting is one of our crucial accountability points. So I just want to affirm that, not just moving on, but that we really, really get clarity on the way we can make them accountable, because only to Treasury or the finances, I understand that, but like Honourable Brian said, all our other entities, they're all national departments, and they fall under us because their mandate comes from us. So I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to say, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Weber. Mr. Amaro, can you then proceed? I think you have noted what was raised by Honourable Webb. Can you proceed with the presentation?
Now, indeed, Chair, I've noted it, and thank you very much. We would, in the next engagement, come back on the issue. Chair, I would start, I think it's clause 16. Yeah, I'll start with clause 16, Chair. On the clause 16, I think the issue of may and must has been one of the issues that has been raised quite a lot, and we propose that the bill hereby substitute foreign clauses where the minister must periodically review and amend the national adaptation objective. So it's substituting the may with the must. Similarly, with the periodical review of the scenarios, we're substituting the may with the must. And on the clause 18, also it talks to the may and the must on the review of the adaptation strategy and plan, at least on a 5-yearly process, a 5-yearly cycle. And on the same clause 19, the issue of the may and the issue of the qualifying the at list and the issue of publishing has been inserted in the bill, as far as the publication of the national adaptation strategy to be in place within 1 year of the enactment of the bill. Chair, clause 20, talking to adaptation information and synthesis report. And I think the key issue there was the reporting was linked to the National Climate Change Response Policy, the white paper, and that has been adjusted to say this will be in fulfillment of the reporting will be in fulfillment of the objective of this act, so that we're able to assess how are we doing as a country on the implementation of the various instruments that are of course required by this act. On clause 21, there has been an issue around the targets of the trajectory. And on this, there has been a call to use the targets that are in the nationally determined contribution, the one that has been released in recent time and submitted to the UNFCCC. And we are proposing that we put a clause to say until such time as the minister published the national greenhouse gas emission trajectory, the latest update of the NDC would remain the key, would remain the key that will serve as a trajectory. And we also propose in the deletion, Chair, of Schedule 3, just to remind honorable members that Schedule 3 contain the trajectory that it's in the policy, in the climate change policy. Clause 21, I think this is on the proposed wording on the sets, and there was an issue around the wording being vague, to be informed by the sets, when the set will be informed by the relevant evidence-based of up-to-date information. And this has been adjusted to say it will be informed by relevant evidence-based and latest information relating to the total current and projected amount of the greenhouse gas emission in the Republic. So it's just to link that allocation of the sets will really take into account the current and the projected amount of the greenhouse gas reduction in the country. Clause 22, Chair, the issue was around in this edition that the sets are allocated to all major emitting sectors, and here the bill is proposing that the minister, within 1 year of coming into the operation of the act, by notice in the Gazette, list the greenhouse gas emitting sectors and subsectors that are subject to sectoral emission target, and this list must appropriately reflect the greenhouse gas emission profile. So there is to be clear that the list must, be able to reflect the greenhouse gas emission profile. The second area was around the varying of the list, where the minister may vary the list of sectors and subsectors that are subject to the sets and guided by the emission profile as contained into the latest GHG inventory and performance against the domestic and international commitment. This is just to ensure that it's clear, it's qualifying that the sets will be guided by our national profile as contained into the latest the GHG inventory. In that clause 22, further down, it was a repetition. We're able to note that because the same clause up is reflecting on that clause, Chair. Clause 23, I think there was an issue of ensuring that there is a clear clarity on the second half of the clause there, and where the minister must, by notice in the Gazette, publish a list of activities which emit or has the potential to emit one or more of the greenhouse gases listed in terms of subsection 1. And I think the previous one was saying a list which the minister believes. So it's just to take a scientific approach there to say a list of activities which emit or has the potential to emit, because this is a scientific process. Clause 22, again on the sets, and there was an issue around the cumulative sectoral emissions are not equivalent to the national GHG emission trajectory. And this is just to indicate that the set are meant to accumulate the emission reduction, not the emission themselves. The primary objective of the set is to really move to us to emission reduction, and this was amended to say the bill hereby, of course, substitute for the following clause: the be aligned with the national greenhouse gas emission trajectory, that are cumulative amount of greenhouse gas emission reduction which sectoral emission target represent, and ensure that the national greenhouse gas emission profile are kept within the national greenhouse gas emission trajectory. Clause 24, I think there was an issue around the act should give some guidance on what prescribed circumstances may include, so that this clause doesn't provide another loophole to avoid emission reduction. On clause 24, 7, and this is around the review of the carbon budget, and it has been of course amended to say a person to whom the carbon budget has been allocated may apply for a revision or cancellation of the carbon budget under circumstances to be prescribed in the regulations. So the regulations will provide more details on the circumstances that will be considered. Clause 27, this is just to create a clause where the minister can make regulations, can be empowered to make regulations that can provide further guidance to the administration of committees. We included the commission, having the presidential commission in mind, that those regulations will be key to also provide some guidance to the commission, and it can also relate to some of the earlier issues that have been raised about some further guidance that might be required. Clause 32, Chair, is on the offences and the penalties. And I think there was an issue around the need to recommend stronger penalties be imposed for non-compliance, and the issue around the enforcement measures for the bill being weak, and the call around strengthening the compliance and the enforcement measures that will serve as a deterrent to non-compliance. On this, Chair, there has been some proposals to improve, of course, clause 32, and to also see how this clause can be improved. So the text that is being proposed there is really to try and enhance the compliance of this bill. And this relates to one, identifying clearly the offenses that if a person fails to provide data, information, document, or samples to the minister in terms of section 21, that becomes an offense. Provision of false and misleading data is also an offense. Failure to prepare and submit the greenhouse gas mitigation plan will also become an offense. Failure to comply with the notice will be an offense, and a person, of course, will be convicted to an offense in terms of subsection 1, will be liable to imprisonment for a fine not exceeding 5 million, and these are sanctions that are aligned with the NEMA, since this is a SEMA, National Environmental Management Act, since this is a specific Environmental Management Act. On the Schedule 2, Chair, there is, of course, these are the sectors that are required to develop climate change adaptation, and there has been some submissions, and we see one, the inclusion of education. And we've also noticed that tourism was not included into the section, and they are also very much impacted by climate change. So we believe that these two can be included to develop the adaptation measures. Schedule 3, as indicated, it's going to be deleted so that the NDC, the current NDC, serve as a trajectory until such time the trajectory has been developed. Chair, that is the end of part A with amendments, and I will hand over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ramaru. Honorable members, I'm going to give over to you. I see the hand of Honorable Weber.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I only have two comments. The first comment is when we were talking about the greenhouse gases and the monitoring of it, and everything is based on the results of the monitoring and the greenhouses. And as you know, we often speak about the monitoring and it is not done well, or there's always problems, or it's vandalized and everything. So I do have a concern about the monitoring and in a way that we need to strengthen our monitoring of the greenhouse gases. And that is essential to the effectiveness of this bill. I mean, we put it in the bill, but there's other process that needs to be followed. So I do want that comment to know that we do have to strengthen our monitoring. Otherwise, this bill is not going to be effective in that regard. Then my second comment, I think it was clause 32 on enforcement. I'm always on enforcement because we can make the penalties 10 million rand in 10 years. And I see that although the comments always was made about the enforcement, we still skip it. You will go, for instance, from point 1F, where it says they fail to comply, to point 2 that says when a person is convicted. But the process from a person not complying to get convicted is the enforcement phase. And I do understand that it's other laws and it's the SAPS and Green Scorpions and everyone that has to enforce the law. But our problem is enforcement and how we're going to enforce and everything. And like I said, that is a comment because it still remains the problem. We can say if you don't comply, this will be the punishment. But the enforcement is still not addressed. And I don't know if legal is there, if one can put something in that. What is the requirements for enforcement? Whether we say it's SAPS, because often I can go to the cops, which I do for air pollution, and they don't know it's their mandate to enforce this law. So again, that's not our mandate, but our problem is the enforcement. And I'm uncomfortable because I cannot give you a solution on how to put it into this bill, but enforcement is still not addressed. We have the penalties and we have the non-compliance, but the in-between is not there, and I'm not sure if there's a way we can address it. And as you've seen, there's many people speak about the enforcement. So yeah, maybe they can help of just putting a paragraph or two in how enforcement should be taken place, what the criteria is, or who is supposed to do the enforcement or something like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Weber. Mr. Amaru.
No, thank you.
And then
Yes,
we will go to part 2 after the response, because I don't see any other hands.
Now, thank you, Chair. I think there are two things. The one on the monitoring of the greenhouse gas emission. I'm going to ask Jongi just to outline how the monitoring of the GHG is and how robust it is. And I'm going to allow legal on the response on the enforcement, Chair, but I understand that as part of NEMA and this is being a specific environmental management, some of the enforcement mechanism under NEMA, the Green Scorpion, are going to be central in ensuring the enforcement, but I'm going to allow legal to cover that. Maybe, Jongi, can you start on the robust monitoring of the greenhouse gas emission?
Yeah, thanks, Flo, and thanks, Chair. In terms of that point as raised by Honorable Weber, in terms of air quality, indeed, Honorable Weber is correct. There is some challenges with monitoring of air quality, particularly the ambient concentrations of air quality. But this is something that's not so much a problem for greenhouse gases, because all the targets that we have to track, the domestic and international targets, they are expressed as a function of the emission releases. In other words, how much greenhouse gases have been released. And for that, we have very sound systems in South Africa. The biggest one, for example, is the reporting program that I talked about earlier on, where we have a web-based system where we compel industry to report. Industry generally accounts for about, give or take, 70 to 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions. That is if you add transport. So for that, we have sound information, and then we have other methods of estimating emissions, for example, from waste, from land use, agriculture, and so on. So we have very sound systems. This is the reason why we are able to, similar to developed countries, we are able to generate an emissions report to give an indication of where our emissions levels are against our target, at least every 2 years. That time frame is compatible with what developed countries are doing as well. So when it comes to greenhouse gases, we don't have much of a challenge there as compared to air quality indeed. Thank you, Chair.
So you want to cover the enforcement?
Yes, no, thanks. On enforcement, Joe was correct that this act will become a SEMA, which I mean it will fall under the suite of laws that are under the National Environmental Management Act, such as the Waste Act, NEM, the Biodiversity Act, and others. In terms of enforcement, the department has dedicated capacity in the form of the EMIs, Environmental Management Inspectors, which are created in terms of NEMA, in terms of the law. So these inspectors are on the ground to then ensure that they do the necessary inspections, investigations where the incidences of non-compliance are reported. They make the recommendations in terms of whether, for example, you issue a pre-compliance notice or a final compliance notice. They also work together with the SAPS in terms of reporting and pursuing criminal related matters. So, Chair, there is dedicated capacity currently to implement NEMA and all the SEMAs within the department. And at the provincial level, I understand there is also inspectors at that level as well to implement the law. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kobesi. May we proceed, or let me just check if there's no other hands. I see the hand of Honorable Winkler before we proceed to part B.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Okay, I have several questions. Has the bill actually benefited from the input of the DFFE's Chief Directorate Sector Enforcement? And has the bill been reviewed and approved by the MinTech Working Group, which consists of both the national and provincial officials responsible for environmental regulation, compliance, monitoring, and enforcement? Then the document refers to the voluntary carbon budget system that is already being implemented. Hence, the promulgation of the bill will immediately formalize the current budgets and will also mean that no delays in allocating more budgets will be incurred, since there's a system that is already functioning. So this is on page 14. Now, question, are these voluntary carbon budgets actually in the public domain, and how were they determined? The DFE notes that in judging compliance against carbon budget allocations, the regulatory framework needs to avoid double penalization. Therefore, National Treasury will outline in the carbon tax legislation the carbon tax accounting mechanism that shall be used to penalize non-compliance against carbon budget. This is page 194. Given that the carbon tax is not a penalty but an incentive for an emitter to reduce its use of carbon, how exactly would a criminal or administrative sanction common to legislation, including all environmental laws, cause double penalization? And note that SASL does talk about avoiding double taxation, not double penalization, on page 208. Then my next question is, the DFE notes that the enforcement measures of the carbon budgets will be covered by the National Carbon Budget and Mitigation Plans regulations, which will only be developed when the bill is enacted into an act. Also on page 200, it notes that in order to deal with SASL's comment on the need to clarify how the tax system and its alignment with the carbon budgeting system shall be achieved, we propose the addition of 27.2A number 2 that reads, the regulations contemplated in sub-regulation shall also outline the enforcement mechanism to deal with carbon budget non-compliance using the accounting framework. And this is beyond the scope of the climate change bill. However, the national carbon budget and mitigation plans regulations that will be developed will provide this clarity on alignment between these two mitigation instruments. So the question is, what enforcement measures are being proposed for these actual regulations? And then on page 197, DFFE notes that the carbon tax accounting framework also considers a system of penalties and incentives to punish non-compliance or to reward good behavior. The statement refers to the Carbon Tax Act, presumably. Question, how does the system currently operate to punish non-compliance and reward good behavior? And then on page 252, the DFFE notes that the issues of penalties for non-compliance with the carbon budget is being considered in the amendments of the Carbon Tax Act. The principles of charging higher rates above the carbon budget allocation have been agreed upon. And the question is, between which parties has this been agreed? And does the DFFE have a firm commitment from National Treasury to this effect? And the last question is it the DFFE's intention to ensure that the National Carbon Budget and Mitigation Plan regulations to be presented to the Minister for consideration is drafted in such a way to ensure that the provisions of NEMA Section 34 and particularly Section 34B, award of part of fine recovered to informant, 34C, cancellation of permits, 34D, forfeiture of items will be applicable? Thank you.
Honorable members, the time now is 12:47. We still have to go to part 2. I have noted that part C deals with other departments and municipalities. But I need guidance from you. Our meeting is scheduled up until 1 o'clock. I need guidance from you whether we should extend by 30 minutes to deal only with part B. We deliberate on it and then we give way forward. I just need guidance. Winkler, Honorable Winkler, I see your hand.
Thanks, Acting Chair. So this is why I brought up how we were going to break up the document and the responses, because of just the vast nature of the comments. And so in the last committee, the Minister had also suggested that we break up the responses over, I think it was 2 or 3 committees. And I think the first one was 100 pages in one sitting, then another 100 pages and another 100 pages, because it really is impossible to do due justice to this document if we aren't afforded the opportunity to really interrogate it and to respond to the department. So I will go with consensus of the committee, but yeah, I think that's my contribution. Thank you.
Can I get input from other members? How do we then move, honorable members?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
And followed by Honorable Brian.
I think your suggestion of us taking 30 minutes and finalize this part, and then we check whether we need to reschedule it, or are we given an opportunity to continue after that 30 minutes, because I'm sure after 30 minutes we will need just a break, and then we come back, or we take that 30 minutes, we finalize, and then what remains is then postponed to the next meeting that is supposed to be set soon. Then the committee can decide which date, on which date are we sitting. I remember that last week we were supposed to sit on Friday. Yeah, but we didn't. But we can then discuss if we can move it to Friday or move it to next week, Tuesday.
Noted, Honorable Mkono. I see the hand of Honorable Bryant.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think let's just try finish what what we're supposed to be doing for today.
Yes.
I'm not suggesting we need to rush it, but let's just see if we can get it done within the next half an hour. I mean, if not, we reevaluate when we get there. But it's not necessarily about us trying to finish by a certain time. I think there's important stuff that needs to be gone through and questions that need to be asked and raised. So, if we can get it done today, then I think that's best. So let's just see how far we can get.
Okay, noted, Honourable Bryant, but we also have other commitments. Remember, we plan according to our schedules. For instance, myself, I have a meeting at 2 o'clock that I still have to drive 30 minutes to Humansville. Hence, I was suggesting that we extend by 30 minutes. Can we go to part 2, Mr. Amar?
No, thank you, Chair. Chair, the part 2 contain written comments with no amendments, and we have grouped the excuse me, the comments. And on the first one, I think the definition on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And of course, there is a call for this to be defined as the IPCC. And what we indicated, Chair, is we acknowledge that the work benefited significantly from this important scientific body. However, in the substance of the clauses, the IPCC is not mentioned. I think it was only mentioned once under the subsectors. So we did not mention the IPCC or reference it per se in the substance of the clauses. And we were proposing that probably we might not want to, define it because it was not used. The greenhouse gas, there in terms of the greenhouse gas definition, means the gases constitute of the atmosphere, both natural and anthropogenic. We just saying the definition in the National Greenhouse Gas Regulations is aligned to the Air Quality Act, and it shall be, of course, revised accordingly in the regulations once the bill is enacted, but there is an alignment with the Air Quality Act. The definition of sustainable development in accordance to UNESCO and alluded to in paragraph of the first paragraph of the preamble, Chair, as indicated, the bill is a SEMA and it will be read and interpreted with the NEMA principle, and the sustainable development is already defined also in the NEMA, Chair. It is advisable that the concept on national circumstances not be left vague to interpretation. Although it is not defined, we say the national circumstances take into account the socio-economic and environmental aspects in the country. And this, of course, we're not really proposing an elaborate definition of the national circumstances. In the addition to the organized labor, civil society, business being identified to advise climate change, research organizations should be expressively identified. Chair, we, of course, as indicated earlier, it has been broadened to include relevant stakeholders. And I could also understand that there was a note that maybe we can explicitly mention the traditional leaders, and we will put a note on this, Chair, and see if we will have to make change on this given the earlier conversation. SASOL recommend the inclusion of the definition of person, which means the definition of person as defined in the Interpretation Act 33 of 1957. The bill is a SEMA, and the word person is already defined into the NEMA. And I think that definition would apply to this bill. There was an issue around the proposed definition of scope 1, 2, and 3 on the emission, set out scope 1 being the direct emission from relevant parties under that relevant party control, and scope 2 emission meaning the indirect emissions. And we say in the proposed text is rather restrictive, will not allow for flexibility in the future should scope 2 emission be considered for carbon budget consideration. So we're not proposing an amendment there. Clause 1 hereby amends addition after the definition of sectoral emission target on the following definition: social partners means all stakeholders affected by climate change. And I think this proposal is not really supported on putting in the social partners there. I think it was very clear into the definition of the sectoral emission target, Chair. We do not have to add the social partners there. Clarity is requested regarding the definition of listed activities. The listed activities for SETS are highlighted in Schedule 1, and listed activities for carbon budget shall be listed in the carbon budget regulations. And we say in this, Chair, it will be done in the regulations. Can't be providing the listed activities within the law itself. There is, of course, a submission on clause 2 around the revision of section 2 objects of the Act so that it can begin with the principal object of transforming it to an ecologically sustainable society by inserting facilitate rapid just transition to an ecological sustainable society that emit less carbon into the atmosphere. We believe clause 2 on the bill already include the objective that address the key elements there of just transition and stabilizing the greenhouse gas emission and protecting and preserving the planet for the future generation. So no amendment proposed. There is, of course, further inputs on adding an objective to outline conflict resolution. And I think the primary objective of the bill is to address climate change and foster coherence. And since this is also a CIMA, Chapter 4 of the NEMA, which deals with these conflict resolutions, will apply. There has been submissions around the importance on the need for sustainable economic growth incorporated in the principle as key part of the just transition. And we're saying the principle that deals with ecological sustainable economies remains central to the bill. And therefore this should be covering the other element without necessarily explicitly talking about the sustained economic growth in the bill. The principle of participatory democracy more broadly in the context of environmental management, and the bill does not address the Bill of Rights, and the principle laid out in section 3 of the bill should be made binding to all organ of state, must apply decision making the matters of climate change impact. The first, Chair, is being a CIMA section, and as part of course the NEMA principle do apply, of which section 24 of the Constitution also apply. So the issue around the Bill of Rights is covered when you deal with section 24 of the Constitution, clearly explicit in NEMA. And clause 4.2 clearly states that the bill binds all organ of state when dealing with issues of climate change. Clause 5, 6, and 4, 5, and 6, there are no comments. Clause 7, I think, talks about the organized labor, civil society to advise on the PCC. And I think we have dealt with this in the earlier, where the bill, of course, deals with the institutional mechanisms, which is inclusive of the PCC. I think the key issue was there are no institutional mechanisms, which is the PCC and the other structures, provincial and local structures, that are key in addressing issues of climate change. Clause 8 and 9, the provision of the membership of the representative of the traditional leadership, representative from the Provincial House of Traditional Leadership and the religious fraternity, representation from the council, the Provincial Interfaith Council. And I think the issue here is really the participation of this key representation into the structures. And we just want to underscore that the provincial and the local forums are, being established in accordance with the Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act. And we, of course, did not make a proposition for amendment on that regard. On clause 9, the bill should be reconsidered because municipalities and districts cannot enforce the current legislation on climate change, and I think we worked on the issue of responded on the issue of enforcement. To say once it becomes an act, it becomes a specific environmental management, and of course the dedicated and enforcement would apply, as Spusiso has already alluded to. In instances where the bill mentioned may in clause 8 and 9 should be changed to must, provincial forum must establish intergovernmental technical working group. I think here we're very clear that we're using the Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act, which is very clear around the usage of may on the establishment of the technical committees, and we believe that that's the approach that we should take to avoid contradictions with the Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act. There was concern that incorporating climate change forums within the Premier Forum and the District Forum may not ensure stipulated climate change response actions are sufficiently prioritized. And I think this Honorable Chair chapter really elevates the issues of climate change to the forums and also talks to the mainstreaming and ensuring that at a provincial level the forums can be at that higher level, can be able to consider climate change matters. Clause 10 to 15, 16 to 26, I think these have led to the amendment that we have seen. I think we have covered quite substantively the amendment, and 16 to 26 also have covered the amendments that we have addressed in the earlier section. On clause 27, the issue of rebates, and I think we're saying the issues of rebates and incentives are already addressed in the provision where we're talking about the incentives, where there's an empowerment to develop regulations in terms of incentives and disincentives, and as such, this does not really warrant the amendment, as this will be dealt with in that regard. Clause 27, the clause will speak to monitoring, enforcement, reporting and compliance, and we say this aspect was already addressed in 27.3, where we're talking about the the contravening and of some of the offenses and the penalties, and also the issue of the enforcement has been addressed in our earlier response as well. On clause 28, bill should have provision under clause 20 that make consultation with community forum local structure compulsory before finalizing the regulations. Just indicating that clause 28 already provides for compulsory consultation by the minister, responsible MEC and mayors when making administrative decisions. And this is consistent with the provision of Pacha, NEMA and all other CIMAs. There was, of course, I think clause 29, where there was a call for a dedicated social media platform that will be used to communicate important issues. I think we note this and the current laws that we have on ensuring that there is enabling access to this information is consistent with Pacha, NEMA, and CIMA. And by the way, most departments now have dedicated social media platform where they are communicating some of the information, and we don't think we should be through this law regulating the use of social media platforms. Public participation, I think there's a comment that it's insufficient, and we indicated that this bill is in compliance with both the Pacha and the NEMA and all other CIMAs in terms of the consultations. When decisions are being made and communicated by notice, even when instruments are being developed, there is a detailed consultative process that has been outlined into the bill. There's no responsibility on the part of the minister, NMEC, and mayors to respond to an objection to exercise of a power emanating from this bill. This means that the public concern can simply be ignored. Just to indicate in the response that the minister is obliged to consider public comments and objections, and comment and response report is being developed for all published notices, which becomes a public document, and appropriate circumstances depending on the nature of the issues to be decided and on the resource available. I think the key response here is there is an established process in terms of consultation, and the clear consideration of public inputs is also being clear established process that we follow. Clause 30, there's no comments. On clause 31, the bill should be rephrased to ease information, transparency, and accountability. And I think this came quite a lot, and we've been having a lot of discussion on the issue of NEMA and CIMA and the issue of PAIA and POPIA to say there's not going to be a different regime through the bill to really manage the issue of information management. On clause 33, should have a section to empower minister and MEC not to consider an appeal from a person that has an outstanding carbon tax. And our response there is carbon tax is a payment, and its payment is an emission accounting issue, and the Carbon Tax Act already deals with transgression and non-compliance in respect to the carbon tax administration and performance procedure. It is unclear whether the role of players, private sector, affected person will be able to give input to the appeal. And our response is once the sectoral emission target, once we developed and published for public comment, that process will also follow for all societal actors to engage with the sets. and appeal will be processed through Section 43 of the NEMA. And there was, of course, the issue, I think, on clause 34 to ensure that the duly revised and amended policies measures are implemented, monitor for effectiveness, and suggest the inclusion of a transitional arrangement that recognizes that substantive revision of the sector implementation plan may require rework and result in execution days possibly leading to target not being met. Transitional arrangement are not required in this case, as this is already recognized, and the bill needs to stress the urgency, and I think we really spoke about the urgency to say the voluntary carbon budget system, the pollution prevention plan system have been ongoing for some time now, and this bill will also just strengthen the processes and make some of these processes even obligatory when one look at the carbon budget. And the last one, Chair, is the Act should focus on inspiring vision of transforming society for better in a way that will simultaneously reduce the threats posed by climate change and make communities more resilient. And I think there was a submission to say this bill must change its name to be a climate stability bill. And we believe that the current name should be retained as it covers both the detailed mitigation and adaptation component of climate change. Chair, I submit those are the comments that they were responses without necessarily proposing the amendments. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Maru. Honorable members, may I note hands? I see the hand of Honorable Mkono. Mkono, over to you.
Excuse. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you very much. It's just on although I will not be specific on the clause. This is the one, but I remember that when we dealt with this, that one of including of talking about the relevant stakeholders. I would suggest that the team and the legal team looks at that in as far as also if we don't include them in the bill, and then but when we go to the regulations, we are specific so that there are no stakeholders that are left behind. The second one, Honorable Chair, is where it talks about the clause that talks about the minister, the MEC, and mayor. But the response, just that I can't remember the clause itself, but the response in terms of the responsibilities there, where it is saying that they won't have the powers, but the response of Mr. Ramada is that he responded on the minister only. I don't know whether when you refer to the minister, you then also refer to the MEC and the mayor at a district or local level. And the last one, it's when we talk about the committees at a local government level, which is where it says where we are referring to where we don't want to be specific on particular issues. I mean, on the composition, and we refer to it as we refer to the premiers maybe coordinating committee or the MEC of environment dealing with that particular matter. I just want to know if we are going to just use the Intergovernmental Framework Act and be specific when we deal with the regulations. How are we going to integrate the two so that we are able to say municipalities prioritize climate change and be able to enforce it? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mchunu. I do not see any hands, but I've noted on the chat box, Honorable Winkler has asked if she can send her questions to the department for responses for next week. That is noted, Honorable Winkler. I don't think there's any problem. Honorable members, I don't see any hands now. But I just want some guidance from the members whether we should allow the legal team to start working on the drafting of a list based on the interaction and deliberations of today, or I need guidance from you members with regards to that. And then next week, department will have to bring the revised clauses that clarify the reporting lines of the PCC and the funding clauses that we discussed and agreed to, and the inclusion of the representatives for traditional leaders in the proposed forums. So I just need your guidance, Honorable members, before I allow Mr. Klo to respond to Honorable Mkunu's question. Should we allow the legal team to start on working on this draft list? Yes, Ma'am Mkunu.
Yes. I think it's proper, Honorable Chair, that we allow the legal team to start working on the A list, so that by next week we are able to move on and look at it. Yeah, but also I think it's fair to do that, so that we don't stand on one items all the on the same items all the time, but we're able to say by the end of this period we have done so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Mchunu. Other members, you would like to want to say something, or you agree with the proposal?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the proposal. And if possible, if my notes or questions that I submit could also be taken into consideration for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Winkler. They will definitely take your questions into consideration. Mr. Amaru, can you respond to the questions that were raised by Honorable Mchunu? Then we conclude with the business of today after that. Ma'am Mchunu, is that your legacy hand or it's a new hand?
Legacy hand. I'm sorry, Chair.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, thank you. Mr. Amaru?
Thank you, Chair. I think Honorable Mkunu raised the issue around, I think it was an issue around the public participation, which suggests that it's not enough, where we indicated that both the minister, the MEC, and the mayor, when they carry out their decisions, they will have to, of course, communicate, among others, through the government gazette. And most of the instruments that will be undertaken by the MEC, the mayors, and the minister, whether it's around the planning instruments, almost will be subjected to the public participation process. And it is a practice that would happen. Maybe I might have just mentioned minister and not say MEC and mayors, Honorable Mkunu, but they will all be subjected to a proper public participation process. The Yeah, the inclusion, Honorable Mkuni, around the issue of I think it's the traditional leaders. I think that can be considered positively, and indeed the team can also look at. I think both the legal teams here can really look at it and help us to address that. The final one is, I think, is the utilization of the Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act, and that remain really the key act that governs how different spheres of government and different government sectors really operate and collaborate. So in most cases, we will be referring to that act as the one that will be providing guidance on the various interfaces that are required by these different spheres of government, without necessarily providing a parallel process which will end up contradicting the Intergovernmental Relations Act. I think that I just also wanted to clarify, honorable members, that mainly we will be on how government interface, collaborate, and work together. It's really governed by that, the Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act. I think those were the key issues, Chair, but we take guidance, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amaru, and to the honorable members. And I think we have covered a lot for today. And I know that you have noted some of the questions and the clarities that were needed. And for the meeting of next week, we will definitely get some of the clarities, and also noted one proposal by Honorable Winger that she will send her questions to the department. I think we have reached the end of our meeting. Let me take this opportunity and thank the honorable members and the officials from the department and everyone who is in the meeting for your deliberations and the responses. Thank you very much. We shall meet again next week. And please don't forget, the department must not forget to send the responses before the meeting of next week so that we can go through the responses, and then if there's any follow-up questions, we prepare as such. Thank you very much. And I think it would be proper if you can get those responses on Friday. I think let me give the time frame of Friday of the responses so that we can get a lot of time to check. I see the hand of Mr. Ramar. Mr. Ramar, do you want to say something before I close officially the meeting?
Yes, Chair, just guidance on when we will be receiving the written comments. I think it's Honorable Winkler as well. We have comments. If we can receive them so that we prepare for Friday, that will be appreciated. So that we have
Honorable
time to.
Winkler?
Okay.
Thanks. I'll submit them right after our PC.
Thank you very much, honorable members and colleagues. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Thank you, Chair.
Hey, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.